I was a privileged person to be able to go with Bishop Rickel and several others from our diocese and the Diocese of Arizona and also of Northern California as we went to the Holy Land and into Jerusalem. And I was reminded again of what a kind of a living rosary, living journey of sacred ritual is associated with that place over the millennia that it has been a holy site for three major traditions. You cannot walk around the Holy Land or walk around the old city of Jerusalem without having a profound sense of the history of pilgrimage there, the history of the meaning that's been imbued in each of these places by the many traditions that walk the streets even today. Much of the access to the occupation level of the first century, where Jesus would have actually lived, you can get to pieces of that depending on where you are, both in the Old City and in the east part of Jerusalem. And one of the places that you can get a real sense of what is this pilgrimage thing all about is in these stories, in this story of the procession of Jesus as a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And he's coming, as it says, from Bethphage and Bethany, the east of Jerusalem. So today, both of those places, Bethphage and Bethany, are considered suburbs of eastern Jerusalem. And their own Bethany itself is only 2 miles away from Jerusalem center. So it's kind of this very amazing sacred geography. If you think about it, you have Jerusalem, the city. To the east of that, immediately to the east, you can see out of the eastern gate a valley called the Kidron Valley. And then up on the other side of that valley is the Mount of Olives. If you come down just a little bit from that height, continuing east, you get to Bethphage and then Bethany. Today, when you go to that place, because of the situation between Israel and Palestine and the creation of the separation wall, there are places in our sacred geography that are very challenging now to get around. It's not an easy journey to be on this pilgrimage. One of the things that the separation wall does, in addition to separating Bethlehem by a wall of 30 feet high concrete from the rest of the east of Jerusalem, is it also separates away Bethany. So if you want to sort of get the sacred geography of pilgrimage in your head and you go to Bethany first, it actually will take you an hour and a half by bus from Jerusalem to get to Bethany because you have to go around on the roads permitted to the people of Palestine. There is no direct route to that. So when you get there into Bethany and you've gone through several checkpoints to do that, several Israeli checkpoints, you can see a couple of different places associated with the story of where the 12 apostles acquired this colt. But the whole imagery of entering the city from the east like this in the sacred geography is to be in itself a symbolic fulfilling of what the Israelites believed that the nature of the Messiah would be, which is that the Messiah would enter Jerusalem from the east and come through the eastern gate. This was so believed that much, much later, under the Ottoman Empire, the church filled up with bricks the eastern gate so that the Jewish Messiah would not be able to come. But in the time of Jesus, this is an open gate, and if you come from Bethany through Bethphage and then to the Mount of Olives, Mount of Olives is about 200 feet above the old city, and you're looking across the Kidron Valley. Quite literally, the Kidron Valley is a valley of death. It's a giant cemetery. It's prime real estate to get buried in. Because on the slope closest to the Mount of Olives, this is a Jewish cemetery all along the wall of that part of the valley. Across from it, closest to the eastern gate and the eastern city wall, is a Muslim cemetery. Again, with the idea that the people who are closest to this gate will be the first resurrected. And so the Ottomans wanted to make sure that they had an army who would also be resurrected to confront the people who would be resurrected. It's very interesting story. But okay, so all these dead people are going to resurrect themselves, and the first thing they're going to do is fight. That doesn't really match the whole peaceable kingdom. What was this all about? Now, as part of this journey that we were making, we had a service. We had services everywhere we went. Well, we had a service at Domus Flevit. Domus Flevit is on top of Mount of Olives, and it is associated as the site where Jesus is looking out over Jerusalem before his pilgrimage into the area for Passover. And as he's looking out over Jerusalem, he's basically weeping for Jerusalem. And so Domus Flevit translates to the Lord wept. And the architecture of the chapel is intended to look like a teardrop. And when you're sitting in this place, there's no stained glass window because it's clear glass. Because when you're looking out over the altar, it's the only altar in the Middle East that faces with the west, so that you can see Jerusalem. So you see this picture as though you can well imagine how Jesus would have been at this prime spot looking out over Jerusalem. And many of us felt very moved by that because we still recognize what a challenge it is in the Holy Land and for so many peoples and for all these major religions. And that in the Middle East today, as we know, there continues to be just a horrific persecution of the church in Syria, the church in the Middle East, the church even in Jerusalem, and the Palestinian Arab Christians who are there. And as I was sitting there on Domus Flevit and looking out at this site and thinking about this, looking out over quite literally the valley of death that Jesus would have progressed through, and all this imagery that he was willing to take on in the full awareness that by this imagery, by taking on this colt, this donkey representing the ride of the King of Peace, of people shouting in joy for this restoration of the kingdom of David, and to walk into Jerusalem during Passover, that could have really incited enormous tension, and did. When more Jews than ever are coming into Jerusalem for Passover as one of the three sacred pilgrimages of the year, and a legion, 5,000 Roman troops have come into the city at the same time from the west to reinforce Herod, who goes to Jerusalem for Passover, ostensibly to celebrate it himself, but he brought along 5,000 of his closest friends. And as I was praying at Domus Flevit, I kept remembering a particular song that was going through my head that we had heard in another sermon during our pilgrimage. This song that was going through my head is associated with an experience back in 1971 in London, England, by a musicologist called Gavin Bryars. Gavin Bryars was working with some others in documenting homeless people that were living in particular areas of London, specifically Elephant and Castle train station and Waterloo train station. Those in the 70s were known as the most extremely poverty-stricken areas of London. And most of the people there were living without amenities and were living in phenomenal lack, most of them homeless, many just simply living in the mud, as they were described, on the streets of London. And so they were creating this documentary and interviewing different people who lived there. But at the same time, Gavin, whose ear was oriented toward music, was also recording like pub songs that they were singing, and songs he was hearing in the street. And one of the songs that he recorded was simply one of these very elderly, homeless man who was living on the streets at Elephant and Castle. And Gavin heard him on the side of the street simply singing this over and over again. Jesus' blood never failed me yet, never failed me yet. Jesus' blood never failed me yet. This one thing I know, for he loves me. And it struck Gavin as he was recording that here is this man who has very little, whom the world and circumstances of life had actually failed him. And here they are doing a documentary about his life, and what they're learning, what Gavin is hearing, is this man without nothing is basically giving thanks for what Jesus has done for him. This song kept going through my head throughout the entire experience of our pilgrimage, and as I was standing there at Dominus Flevit, it occurred to me what a joyous thing this triumphal entry really is. What it signifies for us even today is that Jesus was ready and willing on behalf of all people to confront the oppression of his time, to challenge religious oppression and social oppression, to challenge the idea that each person, all of us, have value, and to lift that up in the face of extreme persecution. Jesus' blood had never failed me yet, never failed me yet. Jesus' blood never failed me yet. There's one thing I know, oh, he loves me so. And the apostles' willingness and courage to follow him into Jerusalem, into a place that's ready to be a tinderbox. And Jesus continuing in the temple, even then in the temple, to basically overturn tables and bring vast attention to himself in that tinderbox. It was the only way, I think, that he believed that he would be taken in front of the people in power who he wanted to have see him. He doesn't do a lot of talking. The whole thing seems to be about wanting to be seen. And on behalf of the people who are least seen, he is ready to do very much like that image of the man in Tiananmen Square, putting himself, and just himself, just his body, the only weapon, if you will, the only resource he has that God's given him, in front of a whole company of tanks. And it is to make the point that each person has dignity and value. And I think of the persecution of the Christian Syrians and the most recent losses of texts that they have been preserving for almost 2,000 years. Texts that were handwritten and date back to the 1st century, or in their care, and are now probably burned and destroyed. And the grief, watching some of the priests talk about that experience, and the burden of knowing that even in the face of all of this going on, that Christ is with them, that Christ has traveled that way, and that in fact we are asked to follow in the midst of that way, and never ever giving up on the idea that God loves us and is with us. Jesus' blood never failed me yet, never failed me yet. Jesus' blood never failed me yet. There's one thing I know, for he loves me so. If this old and homeless man can sing this in the midst of a life that most of us would consider bereft, then we have not perhaps understood the greatest treasure that Christ has given to us. If we only measure our worth by what we have and other people's worth by what they have, then we have not looked with the eyes of Christ. In this Holy Week coming before us, we are asked to reflect on the reality that isn't it true that the greatest challenges of our life, the greatest times when we have been confronted with the greatest obstacles and fear, it's when we've come through those things that we realize what we've gained on the other side is actually more precious because of what we've endured. We are more grateful on the other side, whether it be challenges to health, challenges to our economic circumstances, challenges to our very life, that Christ has experienced that before, and his apostles whom we follow. In the midst of the week to come, today we must remember that all that we have, whether it's stuff, or our relationships, or our skills, or our talents, or the fact that as a church we can celebrate with such beautiful things at a time when other Christians have nothing, and have had those things burned and taken away. And yet I know that as we think about attending services at Holy Week, many people will not do that. They'll simply wait for Easter. It is hard and challenging to be present to suffering, our own and others and Christ. And yet, that victory that we celebrate today, the triumph, had great cost. And we must see that cost. We must see the cost made on our behalf, because it is the very thing that we are asked to give of ourselves. We must, you must, I must believe that we have infinite value in order to understand that what we give, when we give, is inestimable in God's eyes. I want you to think of whatever most challenges you now, whatever has come in your life, that you have recognized that you've needed the presence of God. Jesus' blood never failed me yet, never failed me yet. Jesus' blood never failed